All right. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the recap of SRECon 2024. SRECon was last week. It was a 3 days conference in San Francisco. And there are a lot of interesting talks, a lot of interesting discussions about site reliability engineering, new trends, new learnings for us. And I thought it will be best if we have Sebastian, who has been attending SRECon for last 2 years. I met him actually last year at SRECon, and we have been in touch after that over last 2 years, and we keep exchanging notes. But I met him again at SRECon, and we thought that we'll do like a webinar together where we'll discuss about what we learned at SRECon, what we saw, new things at SRECon. So that's the plan for today. I'll quickly introduce myself. My name is Prathamesh. I work as a developer evangelist at Last9. Sebastian, would love to have, thank you first for being on the show, and would love to have you introduce yourself, and then we can go from there.
Yeah, hello everyone. I'm Sebastian. I guess you can see it from my little subtitle. I'm the Chief Naming Officer for Compass Digital. No, jokes aside, I lead reliability engineering for Compass Digital. My formal title is Director of Reliability Engineering. And yeah, as Prathamesh said, I'm fairly active in the SRE community besides my day job. I like to talk about SRE advocate for its practices and implementations. And yeah, that's kind of what brought me to SRECon, obviously. And then I had a couple other reasons this year as well to go to San Francisco, but we'll dive a little bit deeper into those reasons in a minute.
Perfect. Sebastian, could you also talk about SRECon and how significant conference it is for site reliability engineers? It just completed 10 years, by the way. So this was the 10th edition of SRECon. So like it has its own legacy. A lot of new ideas have come out from that stage where a lot of great speakers have shared their thoughts. What do you think about a conference and its role in shaping the future as well as thought leadership in the site reliability engineering?
Yeah, I mean, I was at SRECon last year for the very first time. That was my first chance to go. Never went like before COVID. And like you said, it's been 10 years now that SRECon has been around and live and sharing content and trying to, inspire SREs across the globe. So for me, SRECon is, I call it a bit of a nerd fest. It's perfectly small. It's really geared towards the actual SRE practitioners as they exist today. And I would also say it's great potentially for people that just got into SRE. I don't know, in the last year, in the last couple of years, potentially. Um, it's just great to create your community connections, build SRE relationships beyond your own company, um, because I feel like this can potentially influence not just your professional development and your career, but also you could be inspired going away from a conference like SRECon, um, and have some outside influence into what you could potentially be trying out, attempting within your own organization and with your own context. So I like that it's small. I like that it's like geared towards our particular niche within software engineering or engineering in general. Um, I like the connections that I've been able to make there, including the one with you, Prathamesh. So and the talks are super high quality, like really are.
Yeah. Mhm.
I think there are not just like scraping the surface of a particular topic. There have been some really good talks last year and this year again, where people are really going deep and going technical, right? And I
Right.
think depending on what kind of attendee you are, you may really appreciate it, right? That people are actually coming
Definitely.
down from the like the higher level overview and dive really deep in a very specific way, and those very like detailed talks can be amazing.
Yeah, and I agree with you that when you say it is a small conference, I definitely agree with you on that. Because one thing that I noticed this time was within 5 minutes of day one, I noticed at least 10 faces that I had seen last year, right? So there is a lot of people who come back again and again every year and contribute it to the community. They share their thoughts. They come as a, like you said, like a nerd fest where you go and talk with people who are very similar to you, uh, who with whom you can share your ideas, with whom you can share your thoughts. So definitely agree on that. To our audience, SRECon also happens in Europe. This year it will happen in Dublin in October, and it happens in North America in California. So those are the two places where it happens. Uh, Sebastian, you mentioned about some of the talks that you liked from the conference. So let's jump into that. I know that you have a list of your top talks from
Yep.
SRE, and would love to know like which those talks are. But also from a perspective of, because you attended the conference last year, were there some new things that you saw this year? Were there any learnings that were different for in this year's conference versus what you saw last year?
I mean, just comparing last year with this year, for me, I went to this year's SRECon with a different mindset, more so, and with different objectives. Like last year, I was a newbie at the conference. It was the first time for me, so I just wanted to take in the experience and wanted to see what it's all about. So some comparing it also a little bit with other conferences that are taking place all year around, and I was like super pleasantly surprised. Like again, speaking of the quality of the talks, last year was amazing. I mean, my head hurt after the 3 days of SRECon last year because I was so hyper focused on learning and getting external exposure and listening to some of the really smart folks that are doing these talks. Like it was amazing learning experience. So if you're just going there for learning, absolutely go and do that. What also happened then, sort of automatically last year, was I started to build a bit more of a relationship network, sort of in the SRE community globally, and I also, um, yeah, ended up revisiting some of those relationships, like you already mentioned this year, right? Like saw some familiar faces, which was great. Met some people that I have been talking to for years with some of them and have never actually met. um, when you are sort of connected into the larger global community, it just happens to be sometimes you are in a place and at a conference and somebody else isn't. And, you know, when the stars align, then the right people are at the same place at the same time. Yeah, so my experience this year was more geared towards, again, learning. I always want to take at least one thing away from a conference that I didn't know before. Um, and the other thing is like connecting with people that, like I said, are very active, like myself, in the SRE community, just getting some FaceTime with everybody. My topic on top of my head right now these days is scaling SRE. So I'm trying to figure out how to scale reliability engineering within my organization beyond my sort of initial boundaries with my team. So I had a lot of conversations, offline conversation at the conference around scaling SRE. It was also a topic at several talks that I attended this year as well, which was nice, very topical and very timely. And then the final reason why I was there, I recently, um, inherited, if you will, um, some additional team members, and they happened to be located in San Francisco. So it was a golden
Okay.
opportunity for me to connect with them in person as well. So
Okay.
that's sort of last year, this year, my experiences, my expectations. My expectations for this year were high again, just because the bar was set so high last year, and I was certainly not. Not disappointed. I didn't go to as many talks this year as I went to last year, again, because my objectives were slightly different. But the ones that stood out for me, the ones that I did attend, I'm happy to go through. There are no particular order for me. I'm not trying to do it like a top 10 and the one on the top is the really best. They were all good in their own ways. So happy to start whenever you want me to.
Definitely. And if you think about the overall program, right, like it was spread over 3 days. I'll just post the link of the entire program in the chat as well, so that if you want to see it, we can check it out. But overall, 3 days, two tracks, more than 30 to 40 speakers, I assume, complete over span over the 3 days of the conference. And the theme was about, as you said, Sebastian, it was about SRE culture, efficiency, and basically making sure that the people aspect of site reliability engineering and the communication doesn't go away. So that's what at least I saw from a program. Unfortunately, I couldn't attend a lot of talks, but Sebastian, you had attended few of them, so we can start with some of your best picks. And as you said, right, no particular order, but some of the best picks that you saw.
Yeah, and the other thing I want to say, I went to a few more talks. I have 9 on my list right now. I went to probably twice that much or twice that many. So no criticism for all the other talks that I did go to and that didn't end up on that list. I mean, the list would be just too long. I just
Yep.
picked a few select. So like let's just start with the first one, which is kind of the keynote right at the beginning, done by Niall Murphy. Obviously, everyone that works in the SRE community, in SRE as a practice, as a discipline, knows Niall. His sort of review of the last 20 years of SREs with some of the highs and lows that he pointed out was just a great introduction into the conference. It was just good to set the stage. It was really nice to get some additional historical context around SRE, right? Because he calls it 20 years of SRE, or some practitioners at Google might call it 20 years of SRE. But as you and I know, for the majority of the SRE public in other organizations, SRE is really not that old. It's not 20 years. It's maybe 8, 9 years at best for most practitioners and companies, because really the dawn of SRE outside of Google happened around 2016, right, with the
Mhm.
publishing of the SRE
Right.
book.
Yep.
So I feel like around that time is when SRE sort of came into the public and people took notice. Company leaders and technology leaders took notice of that new practice and its benefits and its values. So 20 years is a Google perspective or a Google timeline. It's not so much a timeline for most of us, and that includes me, right? Like I've been in this domain or talking about this for the past 8 years, I think.
Mm.
So compared to Niall, I'm still a junior, right? So, but yeah, let's if you start off like going through a number of different talks, it's great historical context, and it highlights some of the things that we have done and accomplished, and some of the things where we still need to work. You know, where we still have shortcomings and things we can improve on. And I like the talk for that very reason.
Mhm.
Any sort
So
of thoughts from your side? Otherwise, I'm happy to go on to the next one.
I agree on the history part, because what I also seen over the last year, I've been talking with a lot of SRE folks, and sharing their stories on SRE stories, my newsletter, and I have had a chance to talk with few people from Google, as well as few people who have moved out of Google and moved to other companies and other roles, and also people who have not been at big companies in like Google, but they have been SREs, right? And one of the big differences is that, um, SRE, is it same as the SRE book or is it different? Is it the same as Google says it should be, or the way they talk about it, or should it be the way your company is structured, or where you are in your journey of site reliability engineering? So definitely agree with that part where it's not the same for everyone. Everybody has their own journey in terms of how they look at observability, how they look at how they run operations from a SRE perspective. And this is really a good talk from that perspective, that even if you are not at that stage, you still get to learn from the masters who have been doing it for 20 years about how that journey has been. So from an
Yeah, very
historical
true.
perspective, great talk. Like you will definitely get some understanding about how things have been shaping up.
Yeah, and it would be silly to ignore the learnings and the lessons from the past. Whether or not the past is 8 years or 20 years, doesn't really matter, right?
Right.
It would be silly to ignore some of the things that have been shared by all the people that used to be at Google or have since left Google. Uh, their runway or their past is just a different one than anybody else's, and like, it's just how you take that knowledge in is very important. How do you contextualize what the Google folks are sharing or have been sharing over the last, say, 20 years with the rest of the industry, right? So it's really important that people critically think about what is being shared and contextualize it for your own context, for your own company, for your own culture, not trying to implement some of those lessons learned verbatim, right? And then I think you're off to a good start. But it's part of our SRE history. In that regard, I value it a lot, right?
Yeah, and also makes sense that it is the first talk of the conference where you first understand the history of SRE and then go to the other talks.
I mean, it's also great if you. I think at some point somebody asked the question to one of the audiences: how many people are there for the very first time, right? Or how
Right.
many SREs have been SREs for only the last 2 years, right? So just
Mhm.
for that reason, starting off the conference with somebody that can provide that historical context, like it's a fantastic way to get into it. Like if you've never heard about it and properly articulated, who better to talk about than Niall, right? So
Makes sense.
yeah. So moving on to the next one, if you don't mind.
Yep.
Um, I think followed Niall right away. It was Corey Quinn's talk. What did he call it? Truth bombs on the topic. Uh, or I call it, he like dropped a bunch of truth bombs. Sorry, that's me saying. Scam or savings, a cloud versus on-prem economic slap fight. Like the first thing I want to say, besides it being insightful, it was also hilarious. It was just plain entertaining. Uh, I don't think I've met Corey before or knew of him before, which is probably totally on me. But it was one of the best talks as a talk. Like, regardless,
Mhm.
I think Corey could talk about anything and make it really interesting and entertaining. He happened to talk about the ongoing conversation in the industry, cloud versus on-prem, and sort of some of the cost considerations around one or the other. And it's funny that this topic comes up because in my recent podcast episode with my co-host Ash, we've been talking about the very same thing. But the way he presented it and the way he sort of wrapped his insights into just a very entertaining and engaging talk, it was
Yep.
just it was just plain amazing. It was just really good. Like if you think like, oh, how can I ever sit through 45 minutes or an hour long talk without falling asleep? There was no chance during that talk that you would be bored or get sleepy or fade. There was no chance. Like Corey didn't give you a chance to do any of those things because it was so engaging. It was really great. Like definitely the slides probably won't do it justice, so don't look at the slides
Right.
for this particular talk. Definitely go and watch it because even on video I think it's going to be great.
Yeah, I attended a lightning talk by Corey on the second day, and it was the same. It was as hilarious as you mentioned. Even it was like only for 5 minutes, but it was the way he delivered it was amazing. And yeah, definitely recommend watching that
Yeah.
to everyone.
Okay, next one, if you don't mind. One of my favorite SRE people in the space, Paige Cruz.
Mm.
99% of your traces are probably trash. That was a topic. Yeah, I want to agree just to that statement or that subject line of the talk itself. What I thought was really great about it, and I think Paige has a real talent for not just talking about traces or observability in general as a topic that is very top of mind for our practice and our discipline.
Right.
She has a real knack for education, for explaining something like traces to everyone. And the
Mm-hmm.
one thing I will say about this talk, I mean, I'm totally going to steal her slides and going to use this internally because the introduction to traces was part of the talk, and I think that material belongs into colleges and universities and online courses that talk about software engineering in general, not just like SRE specific or DevOps or platform engineering specific folks. It belongs into the field of software engineering in general, because too many people, as far as I can see, still are only ever exposed to the topic of logs. That's all they learn in school and university. That's all they come into the industry with, and they're missing such a big portion of of a of the practice of software engineering, where their life could be so much easier. They could be so much more effective. They could be so much more impactful with the work that they're doing right out of the gate as they're coming in as juniors into the industry. If some of that information that was shared by Paige was just
Mm.
shared a little bit earlier, especially the way she shared it, like I have no doubt that I could have understood the way she shared it. I could have understood that in university or in college, like hands down. It was that good, and therefore, I just I just loved the talk. It was so good, and it highlighted one thing for me. It was a takeaway for me, and I know we talk about takeaways a little bit later as well. But the education of the next generation of SREs will be
Mm-hmm.
really, really critical for the longevity of our discipline. And folks like Paige make me hopeful that we can get that done, right?
Right. Yeah.
Um, that's my take on Paige's talk. If you
Mhm.
have nothing you want to add there, I'm happy to go to the next one.
Just one question there. So, apart from the introductory description or the educational content about the traces, overall, the talk I think also talks about how you can utilize the traces in a best possible way, and how you can ignore some of them as well. So, any thoughts on the like takeaways from the topic itself? Because
Yeah,
traces have been playing a pivotal role in terms of how people use them, and a lot of times most of them can be unused. So just wanted to know what you think about it.
I would actually expand that topic that she chose. 99% of your traces are probably trash, to make that a bit broader and say 99.99% of your telemetry is probably trash. Uh, right? Because I know you talk about it, and I talk about it a bunch too. We're talking about a lot of default instrumentation, right? And we'll talk a lot about noise in observability and the storage of all that vast amount of observability data that is now being created
Yeah.
throughout the industry for all the products and services that people are building. But how much of that information, especially that default telemetry, is actually valuable for your particular context and use
Yeah.
cases and problems that you're trying to solve? And I would argue it may not be 99.9% that is trash, but I would still say a majority of it is not valuable. So
Mm.
why capture it? Why have it? Why store it? Why transmit it? All of this just costs you money. It costs you time. It costs you investment. Like, it's not valuable, and it actually has a counter effect where it becomes distracting
Yep.
because you can't see the forest before the tree. That means you cannot answer the questions that you are having because there's so much noise in your observability backend that you can't see the forest before the trees, right? So you don't get to the insights that you want to get to because there's so much distracting information in your observability system. I'm a big advocate of being very deliberate about what you are instrumenting and
Mm.
really going use case by use case and saying for this particular use case or for this particular service or for this particular application feature, I want to create these 5, you know, data points, and I want to collect them continuously in whatever that means in your context, because there's a high chance that when I see disturbances in the data or anomalies in that data, that it's valuable for me, for my business, for my technology team, for my ability to troubleshoot, for my ability to react to incidents, for my ability to develop new code, new features, right? I'm a big proponent of being deliberate about the telemetry data that is being shipped or even just created and then shipped to
Yep.
an observability system. And I think a lot of people would benefit from that because there's so much effort and time and resources and money invested into shipping telemetry that doesn't have any value. That's where people are getting into these conversations nowadays where, oh, observability and observability stacks, they're so
Yep.
expensive, right?
Expense.
I'll stop here, but
Definitely.
that's sort of my take. My takeaway from that is that I expand that idea of the talk to say, like, be very deliberate about your observability data.
Right. Perhaps this is a good topic to continue discussion in another session, because I have some thoughts about why automatic instrumentation might be useful as well at times, because it also reduces the barrier in terms of getting started with instrumentation. But definitely agree with the point that you mentioned about how it can go completely rogue at times and just emit too much of data that is unused. But yeah, we can move ahead. We can move to the next
Yeah,
one.
and happy to have more. There's lots of detail that we can share in different perspectives that
Yep.
matter. So yeah, happy to do that. Next one. This one was a bit odd, but turned out to be awesome at the end. And I'm saying odd because the topic of the talk was very misleading.
Mhm.
Maud Lemaire, she works for Slack. She's a software engineer at Slack, thawing the great code slush. And I thought, what is this? Like, it makes that I couldn't relate to the title, and I think for that reason I went. Like, what is she talking about? You know, what does she want to what does she want to actually present?
Mm.
So ended up going there, and this is one of those talks where A, it was a pleasant surprise, and B, it was really great to see how an organization manages to go from a band-aid and a knee-jerk reaction to a sequence of incidents, um, to a formalized, lightweight approach that scales for the long-term success of your organization. Okay,
Mhm.
let me unpack this a little bit. What do I mean by that? So the talk was basically about a series of incidents a few years ago that brought Slack to make a tough choice to say no more code changes, code freeze, basically. No more
Mm.
code changes going out until we get a handle on our current reliability concerns, and our quality is just not there. We can't push out any more changes because we seem to have issues with quality of our code or ecosystem or platform, right? So tough call to make, right? Nobody likes code freezes. Despite what people may think, SREs, operational folks, don't like code freezes either. Um, but this one was implemented because it was a short-term reaction. It was potentially an overreaction, but it was a choice made in the moment. And then subsequent actions were taken, and a change board was basically implemented. a very manual process was implemented, a time-consuming process and a very costly process with participation from high-level folks, very expensive groups of people within Slack came together and reviewed now every single code change every single day, multiple times a day, right? What I've seen in my past is that approach then was standardized and stayed in place in a lot of organization, like heavy duty, um, very involved, very expensive, very manual. Like some organizations still do this today, very much like that. They never moved away from this, right? They didn't appreciate the toil. They do appreciate the cost, but they want to do it anyway because it gives them some sense of safety and security, right? But what Slack then subsequently did over a course of many months is to look at that process that they're implemented and said, this is too expensive. This is too time consuming. This is too much burden on everybody involved. All the stakeholders involved were time bound now to this particular new process. Like, we got to make this more automated. We got to educate folks better. We got to come up with a different way of basically reviewing code, right? Do
Mhm.
better code reviews at the end of the day, so that change board turned just into a better approach of doing code reviews within Slack, right?
Interesting.
And then a lot of the steps taken within that process were basically automated. Like a
Mm.
great story to be told, also a great story of how SREs can support such a journey, right? From being very error prone, being very unreliable, to being more reliable, having better processes and protocols in place supported by automation, right? Great story all around. Made me very hopeful that this can be done because now there's a proof point in the industry. It has
Right.
been done, right? And yeah, that was sort of a surprising talk all the way around. And the story was just fantastic. It was a great example of how do you get from something very tactical, a decision that you make very much in the moment, to then turn this into an actual improvement of your overall software development lifecycle, right? And for that reason, that talk stood out for me.
Yeah, that is a very interesting topic, because a lot of times what also happens is, the like you said, right, the reaction is almost in a moment, but the follow up is not there, and that means that you run into similar challenges again and again, and that sort of continues. But I think this is a really good case study in terms of how it can be almost applied like a downstream to make sure that every other process gets affected by the decision that was taken. Seems very interesting. I'll definitely check out the video of this talk.
Yeah, it was really great. So the next one was by Daria. Daria works for Microsoft, and if I understood it correctly, Daria is a staff engineer at
Mhm.
Microsoft. Her talk was named "The Art of SRE: Building People Networks to Amplify Impact." That was another one of those unexpected talks, different than modes, but still unexpected. And what I really loved about, she was she was a great storyteller. So she took a very different approach than I think most people would as part of giving a talk. She was using a musical analogy, her being a singer, aside from being an awesome staff engineer, she being a singer in a choir, and she used the choir analogy as a way to explain how you amplify the work of a staff engineer. So if you're a staff engineer, right, part of your job description is to um, coach others, empower others, influence others, like share a lot of the knowledge that you have acquired over the many years that you have been in the industry, right? Because it's great that you are that person, and then all that knowledge that you acquired from all the various places that you've been and all the experiences that you made, it's all in your head. It's great. That's why you got to the potentially to be a staff engineer. But really, what makes you great in that role or in any elevated engineering role is if you can take what you've learned and now share your learnings in such a way with others that um, your skill, your knowledge gets amplified, right? Can be adopted by others. People don't have to relearn the same lessons that you already learned, right? The thought processes that Daria goes through and then shares publicly, not just in a conference, but I'm sure that's exactly what she does working for Microsoft, right? Like, democratize your knowledge, right? Like, make sure it's widely available so as many people as possible can learn from from the things that you have already experienced and that you have acquired in terms of knowledge, right? And that makes you a very influential and impactful person within an organization. And yeah, it was great. Like, it was fantastic talk.
Right. Also, this was one talk that was widely shared on social media as well, with respect to people's reaction to it. Like a lot of people did share this talk on LinkedIn as well as Twitter after it was delivered. So definitely, I think it was well received from a lot of other people as well. Great. We can perhaps move into some other of your talks as well, and then go to the key takeaways that we have from the conference.
Yeah, happy to. The next one, let me take two together here, because they kind of speak to me on the same level. There was one talk by Laura McGuire and Courtney Nash. That talk was called Hard Choices, Tight Timelines, a closer look at skip level trade off decisions during incidents. So the topic itself was very interesting, but I'm going to talk about this talk in a different light and for a different reason. And the second talk that I want to mention is one that was by Catherine Bauskill. Sorry, Catherine, don't shoot me if I'm saying your name the wrong way. I was trying. Her talk was called Measuring Reliability to Optimize Trade-offs, an Anthropological Approach. So part of the one of the themes that came out for me from this year's SRECon was the one about, is SRE an engineering discipline? That was one of the things very early proposed. I think it was even part of Niall's initial keynote. It's the wonder whether or not reliability folks should be called reliability engineers, because engineering implies a certain level of maturity. It definitely implies that it could be something that should be taught in colleges and university as a discipline, right? As a focus area, as a minor or a major, right? Um, and it speaks towards, but then the one condition that people were usually making that advocates against it being called reliability engineering is the one where um, because there's no research happening in that field. And I think that myth was thoroughly dispelled as part of this year's SRECon, because there were like numerous examples over the course of the 3 days where you could see research papers around our discipline, around the engineering of reliability, right? Numerous research papers and really smart people like Laura, Courtney, and Catherine that are doing a lot of research these days and have been for a number of years already, right? They have published papers. Some of their work is instrumental to how we do the things we do today, right? And so these talks stood out for me because they were kind of proof points that research is absolutely happening within reliability engineering. And therefore, I think we can make a very strong case that reliability engineering carries the name, rightfully so, right? Again, it's an engineering discipline, right? Because we have research and research continues. The other person that is constantly being mentioned in numerous talk is Dr. David Wood or David Woods. Not sure exactly, but I've seen many examples of his, again, full of research approaches being taken to our discipline to evaluate certain topics within reliability engineering. And yeah, again, there's so much research happening over the last few years in reliability engineering. So I think that myth was thoroughly dispelled. There is a talk that I will be mentioning in a moment that speaks a little bit more to one of the challenges within reliability engineering as far as the application of that research, right? And as far as the education of the next generation of SREs is concerned, right? We still have a long way to go there. Any thoughts? You are on mute.
Yeah, sorry, speaking on mute. But yeah, we can perhaps like discuss the other one that you have, because that topic is pretty interesting, where you'll talk about the challenges of applying some of these research to the actual discipline of day-to-day work, because that's where I think the rubber meets the road, and we have to basically apply these things in practice. But would love to know your thoughts on that talk.
Yeah, so the talk that I was referring to was the one by Mickey Dickerson, Teaching SRE. That was amazing. Like, again, besides it being super um, insightful and just a generally great talk, very different. Like, Mickey reminded me a little bit in terms of its delivery um, of Corey. Again, different personality. Not trying to compare the two to two people with one another, but it was just very genuine. It was just very straightforward, and it was direct, and it was blunt, and I just loved it. Right, as a person, as a professional, I like the direct approach that Mickey took as part of his talk. And he was talking about how he's teaching or has been teaching um, in college,
Mm,
trying to. I don't think he particularly or he specifically teaches reliability engineering in college, but I think what he does do is infuses his teachings with some of the um, lessons learned, some of the practices that are near and dear to the hearts of reliability engineers, which
mm,
I thought was amazing that he does that or did that. Fantastic talk, and how he sort of explained how he goes about teaching some of the fundamental principles and ideas and practices to the next generation. And it kind of highlighted one thing that I've always believed uh, is true, where we still have a long way to go as far as the education side of reliability engineering is concerned. Right. So
mm,
how do we get to not just encourage the next generation of potential reliability engineers, but how do we go about educating them? Because that's, for me, is one of the most often or frequently asked questions to me personally as a director of reliability engineering. When I work with other software engineers or other engineering disciplines, people that work in software engineering, whether it's back end, front end, wherever you might find yourself, you're a software engineer, right? And now you hear about reliability engineering and you're interested in getting into it, right? Where do you start? How do you start? What do
how
you
would
focus on?
Yeah.
Like, it's I have a very personal story about it, and I have a very personal approach to it, and how I sort of get newer folks into it. But it's by no means structured, or there's no prescription behind it. It's very geared towards the individual, right? So my approach certainly does not scale, right?
Mm,
So the question now becomes, how do we get our education, the things that we've learned, how do we get that to scale? How do we get the next generation educated such that there is some runway to our discipline, right? There's a future for our discipline. We were talking about SRE being 20 years old, right? What about the next 20 years? I mean, in another 20 years, I'm retired. I know that much. But what about the next generation, right? And as much as I'm trying to talk about SRE, educate people publicly, privately, in my various jobs that I've held over the last 10 years, right? Again, that approach doesn't scale. Even if every single reliability engineer today or leader were to take my approach, it still doesn't scale, right? It just doesn't, right? We know software engineering is being taught in colleges and universities, so that's a scalable approach, right? We have thousands and thousands of software engineers coming out of all sorts of different higher education scenarios,
right.
but there's no one coming out of there um, having already a somewhat specialized um, in the area of reliability engineering. So,
Yeah, that's a very interesting topic as well, because a lot of times what happens is companies have their own boot camps or uh, uh, like programs where they sort of transition some of the software engineers into SREs as well. At least that's what I've seen in few companies. But it's almost ad hoc in a lot of places, where depends on the personal interest of a lot of people as well, if they want to move into the SRE role, and having a structured way, especially where you can uh, do a almost like a mass education out of college. That will be really interesting aspect, because it will just make it much more democratic, where everybody will have access to it rather than depending
right.
on those mentors or those masters of the craft as well. You can get access to them later, but at least the getting started barrier sort of goes away. So pretty interesting. Sebastian, we are almost out of time, so I don't want to take a lot of more time from you. But perhaps we can talk about some of the key takeaways that you think are relevant from your perspective from the conference, especially what you liked, what you did not like, what trends you see. Like you said, like 20 years have gone by, so what about the next 20 years? And I think your takeaways from with respect to that would be very relevant for the audience.
So yeah, I'm going to mix up a few things because some of the things I already mentioned as I was
Right.
explaining my way through some of the talks that I really appreciated. We talked a bit about education. We talked about the next generation of SREs. Some of the things that stand out also as has room for improvement. Um,
Mhm.
SRE as a discipline, as a practice, to not be solely or in the majority being discussed in our echo chamber. So we need to be very aware that who we're talking to is not always the same audience, right? Like we want to spread SRE as a discipline and as a practice, right? So how do we do this effectively? It's not by talking to one another. I mean, talk to one another. Of course, you and I talk constantly with one another, right? But we need to find new creative ways to, going back to Paige's talk, right? Where
Mm.
we're having an approach that allows for our knowledge and our experiences to be shared with everybody in the industry that is in software engineering or hardware engineering or in some other engineering discipline, right? How do we make that leap? How do we make that transition from talking to one another or talk to more of the people in the industry and therefore drive education and drive adoption, right? So that's another takeaway for me. We still have some ways to go there. And one other thing that came out of the conference that is also on top of mind for me as an reliability engineering leader, also formal leader in an organization, is the continued value articulation around SRE,
Mm,
right? It's one thing to start SRE within an organization and have some successes early on, right? It's quite another to continue to articulate the value of SRE as you're making progress, right?
mm,
As you're making inward roads within your company, within your organization, right? That you have ways and means to talk about SRE on a continuous basis with different teams, different parts of the organizations, um, different types of leaders within your company, right? So that when the time comes where you need to ask for additional investments, or you need to ask for more time, or you want to propose a change in direction, right? Or you want to be progressive and want to suggest a different approach on how we do things, right? You want to have built up that social capital, and you want to have built up that log of successes, and you want to have some metrics that you can bring to the table, where you can say, over the last year, over the last 2 years, this is all the things, or these are all the things that we have accomplished. This is how we sort of changed things around in this organization, right? We made improvements, we made impact for the betterment of the business, right? And then leverage that in order to advance the discipline within your organization even further, right? Talk a bit more about some of the more advanced concepts and practices and ideas, right? But you never get to do this potentially if you're not well versed as an individual contributor or as an engineering leader within SRE, if you are unable to articulate the value continuously to the rest of the organization.
yeah, that's a solid takeaway, I think, overall from the conference. Just one last question, Sebastian. Which conference you're attending next, apart from SRECon?
I think for personal reasons, I really want to see if I can make my way over to Europe. And I floated it a couple of times. SRECon in Europe is happening. You said it, right? In October.
Yep.
That's definitely on my agenda. I don't know if WTF's SRE is happening this year in London. That was on my list of things to attend. And I have yet to make it to a KubeCon. So one of
Okay.
these days, I will just check it out and see how I like KubeCon and the people that are coming together there. But yeah, so those are on my current short list at the moment. The other thing in terms of conferences, I also want to really find um, conferences that are not specific to SRE,
Mm,
but I think it was one of the talks that was talking about SRE in the context of security, or
mm,
security and SREs are not really at odds with each other. They have commonalities, they have common goals and interests potentially. So maybe attend um, a well-regarded security conference, where um, you know maybe even talk there about SRE, what SRE is all about, and how we are not so different from one another. There's a lot of overlap in terms of what we are trying to accomplish and how we are going about it, right? That basically looking for industry events and conferences where uh, we talk as SRE practitioners and advocates more to the adjacent disciplines um,
mm.
that are close to us, right? And sort of continue to have those conversations with those practitioners. Um, Performance engineering, for example, is another area, right? But software engineering, of course, it's sort of an obvious one. But
Yep.
those conferences that are not geared towards SREs, but have to do with adjacent disciplines, I just need to find the right ones.
Definitely. I think if you want to attend a KubeCon this year, there is a KubeCon happening in India as well in December. So you have choice now.
Nice. Is that the
Not just
first one
Europe,
in
but even
India?
first one in India. Yes, that's
Very
happening in
cool.
December. I think the other one is in Salt Lake City in November. So yeah, multiple options.
India is another good target. I've never been, so that would be interesting on numerous levels.
Awesome. Sebastian, thanks a lot. Really appreciate you taking time and sharing your thoughts on the SRECon last week. You have also shared some of the links that you found useful, where other people have also shared their thoughts on SRECon. I'll share those in the comments and also upload them on the video when it is out. But really appreciate the discussion, and I think it was really valuable to people who could not attend the conference but get a perspective of which talks they can see when they're already on YouTube. So really appreciate your time.
Yeah, absolutely. It's always fun talking with you, obviously, and you know me a little bit. I love talking about this. I could talk about this every day. So yeah, if anybody has any questions around SRE, I want to just extend the offer. Reach out to me. I'm very active on LinkedIn. I'm also in their reliability Slack that was recently started for our community. So yeah, just reach out to me wherever you get hold of me under my name or SRE Insights. Sometimes is my moniker. Um, Find me. I also do a podcast, the SRE Path podcast with Ash Patel. You hear me talk a lot more there with Ash about SRE and adjacent practices. So yeah, I'm just want to offer it out to the community that if you have any questions, come and talk to me. I like talking about it.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks a lot.